Under a crisp October sky, the blue and yellow of Ukraine's flag ripple beside the stars and stripes. A small group of officials, aides, and security personnel wait near the White House's south portico. Moments later, the motorcade arrives, black SUVs gliding to a stop, the doors opening in practiced choreography. President Volodymyr Zelensky steps out, adjusts his jacket, and walks toward the steps where US President Donald Trump waits with an extended hand and a brief, deliberate smile. The cameras flash. Their handshake, firm, long, slightly theatrical, captures the symbolism of the moment. Two leaders once separated by distance and distrust, now standing shoulder to shoulder before the world's lenses. Behind the ceremonial greeting lies a meeting loaded with consequences, the future of Ukraine's defense, and the possibility that American Tomahawk cruise missiles might soon change the balance of a war that has consumed Europe for more than 3 years. As reporters shout questions, Trump gestures toward the entrance. "We'll be talking about peace and security," he says, his voice echoing across the columns. Zelensky nods, responding in English that Ukraine is grateful for America's support and for partnership that means survival. Then the two leaders disappear inside. For Washington, this meeting carries historical weight. It comes at a time when Russia's relentless airstrikes have once again plunged large parts of Ukraine into darkness. Just 24 hours earlier, power grids across Kyiv, Dnipro, and Odessa were struck in what Kyiv describes as the most coordinated bombardment since the war began. Footage from the Kyiv region shows narrow streets lit only by torches, families queuing for bottled water, and emergency crews hauling generators through debris. In that darkness, the question of weapons, of range, deterrence, and consequence looms larger than ever. The Tomahawk missile, capable of flying over 1,600 kilometers with precision guidance, has long been a symbol of US military reach. To hand such a weapon to Ukraine would be to cross a strategic threshold, not just militarily, but politically. Trump has hinted at this possibility before. In a recent rally, he declared that the United States could threaten Putin with the delivery of Tomahawks if Russia keeps up its aggression. But he also framed it as a conditional move, leverage rather than commitment. "We're not looking for escalation," he said. "We're looking for results." For Zelensky, results mean survival. Ukraine's defense lines remain stretched thin. The war has cost thousands of civilian lives, displaced millions, and drained the nation's power infrastructure. As he walks through the White House halls today, his agenda is clear: secure long-range capabilities, sustain Western unity, and convince Washington that a decisive edge now could prevent an even greater disaster later. Inside the Oval Office, the scene is both formal and tense. Trump sits beside Zelensky, the two separated by an arrangement of flags and the low gleam of the presidential seal. Cameras roll briefly as journalists are ushered in. Trump begins with familiar notes of strength and self-assurance. "President Zelensky and I have a very good relationship," he says. "We're discussing ways to bring this conflict to an end, but also to ensure America's own defense priorities are met." Zelensky, speaking softly but firmly, thanks Trump for leadership and insists that Ukraine's victory is not only our victory, it is the world's defense against tyranny. The words, though diplomatic, carry the weight of a plea. Moments later, the doors close and the real conversation begins. Away from cameras, away from the noise, advisors from both sides sit with papers and digital tablets, intelligence briefings laid out like maps of tension and trust. The US delegation includes Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor John Ratcliffe. On the Ukrainian side, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov and Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba flank Zelensky, each taking notes as the discussion deepens. Reports from inside describe a direct, sometimes charged exchange. Trump presses Zelensky on accountability for US aid, emphasizing transparency and efficiency. He reminds the room of his earlier warnings. "We have to make sure what we send is used wisely. The American taxpayer deserves that guarantee." Zelensky responds that every weapon received from the US has been logged, tracked, and deployed under NATO-monitored systems. He adds, We're fighting not only for territory, we're fighting for values you taught the world to defend. Outside, crowds have gathered along Pennsylvania Avenue. Some wave Ukrainian flags, others carry placards demanding restraint. The divide in public opinion mirrors the debate inside Congress, where lawmakers from both parties have argued over the scale and scope of support for Kyiv. Over the past months, Trump's approach to foreign policy has been marked by negotiation through pressure, a blend of warning and willingness. He has repeatedly expressed frustration with Vladimir Putin's behavior, saying at one point that the Russian leader had crossed lines that cannot be uncrossed. Yet Trump also insists that he still sees a path to dialogue, even as he threatens tougher measures if Moscow continues its offensive. From the Kremlin, the tone has shifted. Russian media has accused Washington of arming Ukraine for long-range strikes, warning that any deployment of Tomahawks would be treated as a declaration of participation in the conflict. Diplomats in Moscow claim that such a move would destroy all remaining trust. But US officials point out that Russia itself has used long-range missiles from day one, targeting civilian centers across Ukraine. In a statement earlier this week, the Pentagon confirmed that the Tomahawk issue was under review, but added that no final decision had been made. Analysts suggest that the missile's range could give Kyiv the ability to target Russian bases, logistics hubs, and command centers hundreds of kilometers from the front. Others caution that it could provoke direct confrontation between Washington and Moscow, a scenario no one wants to test. The conversation in the West Wing stretches longer than expected. Lunch becomes a working session. By afternoon, aides step out with brief notes for the press. The initial summaries are cautious. Both sides discuss defensive priorities, strategic deterrence, and humanitarian aid flows. No mention yet of final decisions, but behind the official language lies a shifting dynamic. Since returning to the White House, Trump has sought to redefine America's role in global security. His aides call it strategic realism. Critics call it transactional diplomacy. Either way, today's meeting fits the pattern, offering partnership, but on terms that serve US interests first. Hours later, the two presidents reappear before the cameras. The press conference is carefully staged, 2 podiums, 2 flags, a single narrative of unity. Trump opens with his characteristic blend of optimism and caution. "We had a very productive meeting," he says. "We discussed peace, power, and the protection of freedom. The United States will always stand for strength and for smart strategy." Zelensky, looking visibly tired but resolute, speaks next. "I came here not only as a president, but as a soldier of my country," he says. "Our people are strong, but strength must be matched with support. We count on America's friendship, and we will never forget who stood with us." A journalist asks about the Tomahawks. Trump pauses, then replies with deliberate ambiguity. "We discussed many options. Some are on the table, some are not. You'll know when the time is right." The room buzzes with speculation. Zelensky remains expressionless, his hands folded tightly. As the leaders leave, the White House press team releases a short statement noting advancements in bilateral defense coordination. Meanwhile, Pentagon officials confirm that technical assessments of missile transfers have been completed, though approval remains pending. Beyond Washington, reaction is swift. In Kyiv, the nighttime skyline flickers as the power grid struggles to stabilize. Civilians gather in cafes powered by generators, watching the live broadcast. Some cheer, others shake their heads. "We need those missiles," says a volunteer medic. "If we had range, maybe Kharkiv wouldn't be in the dark again." In Moscow, the narrative is predictably defiant. Russian state channels frame the meeting as evidence of US interference. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov declares that any attempt to deliver long-range weapons to Ukraine will have consequences. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accuses Washington of playing with fire. European capitals respond more cautiously. In Berlin, officials urge restraint but acknowledge Ukraine's legitimate right to self-defense. In Paris, President Macron issues a brief comment. "Deterrence is part of peace, but so is diplomacy." In Warsaw, the tone is more direct. "If Ukraine falls, we are next," says a Polish defense official. By evening, global media is saturated with headlines. Trump and Zelensky discuss Tomahawk deal. Putin warns of red lines. Europe divided over missile aid. Analysts on Talk shows debate whether Trump's ambiguity is strategic or symptomatic. Some see it as leverage, a way to keep both allies and adversaries guessing. Others worry it signals hesitation at a critical time. As the day turns to night, Zelensky departs the White House for Blair House, the traditional residence for visiting dignitaries. From there, he holds a small debrief with his delegation. According to aides, the Ukrainian team views the meeting as a qualified success, not a breakthrough, but a step toward one. Meanwhile, footage circulates online showing U.S. Navy destroyers test launching Tomahawks off the Pacific coast, exercises planned long before today, but now viewed through a different lens. Each launch streaks across the horizon like a line of fire cutting through uncertainty. Analysts recall the missile's history, from the Gulf War to Syria, from the strikes on ISIL targets to the deterrence operations in the Pacific. The Tomahawk is not just a weapon, it's a message. To deliver it to Ukraine would mean extending that message across an entirely new frontier. Late that night, Trump returns to social media, posting, "Strong meeting with President Zelensky today. America stands for peace through strength." Always, the post gathers millions of views in minutes. Zelensky responds with a simple image, the two leaders shaking hands, captioned, "Together for freedom." Across time zones, the world interprets, speculates, and waits. Diplomats begin recalculating their briefings. Defense analysts trace new maps of possibility. For ordinary Ukrainians, it all condenses into one hope, that words in Washington will soon translate into protection at home. Back in Kyiv, power flickers again in apartment windows. A mother lifts her child toward a candle's glow. A generator hums outside a hospital, treating the wounded from the latest strike. Somewhere in that fragile light lies the meaning of the day's diplomacy. Not just politics, not just missiles, but survival. And as the White House lights dim and the cameras pack away their tripods, one truth remains. In the long arc of this war, every handshake carries history, and every promise, the weight of lives depending on it.